All right, good afternoon to you, ladies and gentlemen. Some people we've not heard from since the start of the year, like the Ambassador Henry Maega. We're glad to have you this afternoon. Milton Amadi, thank you. Good to see you. Francis Kamhanda, it's good to see you. And Miriam, welcome to the Civic Space TV Uganda Diaspora Show. And we will be taking you all the way till some good time. So we're here to have a good conversation on a lot of things. Follow our conversations on social media, on Civic Space TV, on Twitter, Facebook. We are on LinkedIn. We are on Instagram. We are also definitely and most importantly on YouTube. That's where you will find us stationed. Okay, so today we'll be looking at the State of the Nation address by the President of the Republic of Uganda on 7th of June and the fate of UPDF soldiers in Somalia. So that is our focus for today. And as I speak, our president has gone into a 2-day self-isolation because he has caught COVID. He was diagnosed with COVID and he's in self-isolation, but he's doing okay. He'll be fine, so they tell us. And he's officially delegated his official work to the Prime Minister, Robin Nabanja. And also, in the week, the UPDF returned 54 bodies of soldiers that were brutally killed in Somalia. If we caught the news that was making headlines throughout the week. Also in the same week is when we got to the State of the Nation address. And you know, the State of the Nation address ushers us into a new financial year as a country. And there are quite a number of issues that the president hinted on during the State of the Nation address. And it was also Heroes Day just yesterday, 9th of June. It was Heroes Day. So there's been a lot over this week. So I welcome you to the show once again. And I remind you that this is very important for us as a country, and Ugandans in diaspora, you play such a huge role. But before we can get into the hard conversations of this show, I would love to hear from you people. I'd love to hear, and because it is at this end of the week, I would want to hear from you. What made news for you this week? I want to begin with you, Milton Alimadi. What made headlines for you this week? What stood out?
Locally, I live in New York, so the last 2 days, today is much better now. We were subjected to a cloud developed by a smoke cloud because of the forest fires in Canada that actually drifted thousands of miles all the way here to our city. And you know, New York is a city of very tall buildings. So the entire city was engulfed under this, man-made smoke, literally. You could barely see because the sun was blocked, but it gave you an indication of, the dangers of environmental destruction. When a city could be normal one day and then the next day it's completely engulfed under this cloud. People who had discarded their breathing masks because the COVID pandemic is now under control had to dig out their mask again just to be able to breathe when they went outside. So that was the big news for us here in New York City this week.
All right. Ambassador Henry Maega, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too. It's long since.
Yes. So what's making headlines for you, Ambassador?
So many things, but I just want to say one thing at the beginning. What made news? Of course, there are so many things, but the most important one I think was the State of the Nation address, because the president was able to speak about so many things that have been happening in the country, and of course, the guests about the many things that he spoke out about. is that it depends on where you're actually reasoning these things out from what vantage point. But he was in a position to review the past performance of the country and also to project where the country is going. Of course, it is unfortunate that at the same time as he was giving the State of the Nation address, he also told the Ugandans that he had caught COVID, and we just want to wish him all the best as he recovers from the disease. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Francis, it's been a minute. How are you? And welcome to the show. So what made headlines for you this week?
Thank you, Lynn, and the other panelists, and especially seeing Ambassador after a while. There are so many things that to me made headlines. The first one, of course, being the president contracting COVID, and amidst all lectures that he was giving everyone on how this problem can be avoided. Then number two, what normally surprises me when it comes to the State of the Nation's address, instead of the president telling us issues and how practically the problems that we are facing should be solved, he's always taking us on a merry-go-round into history and so on. And then lastly, I still, well, I understand what Heroes Day should be, but I still don't know whether it is a show for the NRM and it loses meaning to me. So those were quite, I'm still even thinking how to wrap my heads around them to make them gain meaning for our nation. Thank you.
Right. And Miriam?
Hi, everyone. I was also watching what was happening in Uganda, and we've had the previous weekend a celebration of Uganda Matters as Ugandans in Ohio, so that was a highlight. But then this week I was also watching the State of Nation. You know, all the time you keep hoping something new is gonna come out. Yeah, this time something new happened, and the president, for the first time in so many years, 40 or plus, he told the country that he's sick, but not very sick. But that was, I kept on wishing he could also say I'm admitted in Morago or somewhere in Chulundu so that he can see the state of the medical centers in Uganda.
Wow.
I wish him recovery, but I wish he could just, take a walk there, wait in a line like everyone else, and they tell him that, we don't have gloves, we don't have oxygen, the simple things that every Ugandan, ordinary Ugandans meet every day, but which he might not be aware of.
Absolutely.
He's aware.
He's certainly aware. He is aware. And I think he's working with the Ministry of Health to make sure that those things are available. But even if he lined up as the president of Uganda, definitely he would not line up like you and I. So
yeah, but at least he will get that smell, that typical smell,
Absolutely. All right, let's get into it. Most of you have hinted on the State of the Nation address, and he did indeed highlight a couple of things. But most importantly, he noted that he was quite content with the economy's progress, which he said recovered from a nosedive during the COVID-19 pandemic and is set to hit about 55.2 billion US dollars. He said that the beginning of this year that we are starting, of course, that was the start of a new financial year, and he's looking forward to better economic performance, but we are not feeling it generally. And that's the general feel across the country, that there's an economic situation going on, yet according to the State of the Nation address, we seem to be doing well. And this is where I begin from. I will start with you, Ambassador Henry Maega. We seem to be getting reports from different ministries, Ministry of Finance, most importantly, and even the president, saying that the economy is in a certain steady sort of progress, but it is not felt. And we have been here for a while. He also hinted at the fact that we have, defeated the rapid increase of prices. Food prices remain high, of course, due to climate change and droughts and ABCD. But do you agree that this is actually what is happening?
Well, Lynn, once again, thank you very much for the opportunity. In the president's speech, he mentioned quite a couple of things that are happening in the country. The first one, which he said, was that in 1986, when the NRM took over government, the GDP of the country in its totality was 1.5 billion US dollars. Right now, as we speak, we are talking in terms of 50 billion US dollars as GDP of the country. For me, that is remarkable. Of course, there are discussions about that because some economists who would want to go deep into the analysis of these things would say, what was the population, for instance, in 1986? I know those arguments are going to come up. And what is the population at the moment in 2023? And therefore, when you share out the GDP currently, you divide it by the numbers of people that we have in the country, what is the per capita income? Those arguments definitely are going to come, but at least I'm happy that Uganda's economy has not been stagnant. And I can assure Ugandans that for me, as far as the representation that I've done for my country in China first from 2015 to 2019 and currently from 2021 to 2023 in the UAE, we have been at the forefront of ensuring that we attract as many investors as possible from both these countries. Before I left China in 2019, for instance, we had foreign direct investment amounting to lots of billions of dollars. And by the time I left China as deputy head of mission of the Embassy of Uganda, China was the biggest provider of FDIs. Now, as we speak, of course, currently I can also talk about probably a little bit of what has been coming from the UAE in terms of foreign direct investment. We're talking in terms of something like 4 billion US dollars that has been attracted to the country right from the time when we had the Expo 2020 in Dubai. And so these are very good numbers, impressive numbers. Of course, when you add what the other embassies are doing in their respective capitals of other countries, of course, in terms of attracting tourists, in terms of attracting foreign direct investment, in terms of attracting trade and also all sorts of things for purposes of ensuring that the economy of Uganda grows, I think everybody seems to be doing a very good job. The president, of course, also talked about other things to do with the economy. I mean, the numbers of, for instance, tourism that have been increasing over the years. But also we should remember that the trajectory of the economic situation of the country was interrupted by quite a number of things, but the biggest of which was the pandemic, which slowed down development, and then, of course, the after effects of the Russia-Ukraine conflict that actually had lots of impact on world economies. Of course, Uganda was not excluded from those impacts. And those are things that dragged us a little bit backwards. But the country is making quick recovery, and I believe that we are on the right trajectory in terms of economic recovery. And I believe that if we can go on at the rate that we are performing currently, we are definitely going to make really very good progress in terms of economics. Of course, he talked about quite a number of other things, the economy aside, because you see, the economy is a very complex concept, and you have to factor in quite a lot of things, because if you don't have security, you cannot, there is no economy to talk about. He said very clearly that the country is very stable, the country is secure. Of course, there are incidents of crime that have been happening, especially in the most recent months. where a minister, for instance, was killed, where quite a number of people have been shot dead, and the indiscipline of the security forces. And of course, right as you put it, Lynn, at the beginning of this conversation, what happened recently in Somalia. So all these things have to be factored. But in the whole, on the whole, as far as I can see, the country, and as far as what the president said, the country is stable, and that is a very good sign for the economy. And I believe that will make a lot of headway. You can go on really talking about the rest of the things which support the economy. Of course, there is security, there is agriculture production. How are we faring? There is the PDM, which is already increasing, is going to increase production, I believe, before the end of this year. And for us, we are on the ready as far as the UAE is concerned. When, for instance, coffee production increases, there is a market here, which you can't believe. And we just need to increase those numbers so that we can have more and more foreign exchange. So I'm not saying that we are yet there, but I think the country is on the right trajectory. Thank you very much.
Yes, right. Thank you so much, Ambassador Henry Maiga. Milton Alimadi, I come to you. Earlier the last time before the last State of the Nation address, which was last year, same time actually, same period, same date. We were having a challenge of fuel. The fuel prices were, shooting up, and everybody was calling for him to give subsidies, which he refused to give. And now, when he was speaking, this is one of the many things he talked about, but it caught my attention. And he says that he was very happy he did not pay attention to calls for subsidies on fuel. And he's proud that now the prices have gone down. It is just an example of the many. He said that there's no more excuse for people who want to, remain in poverty because PDM is here. That is the parish development model. It is here, and the money is a revolving fund. And for people who want to access it, will get out of poverty. He also boasted about the country's industrialization exploits. He says we've made headway, we've made progress. Now I come to you, Milton. Of course, he talked about a lot of things, but those are some of the issues. Maybe if I could mention also that our exports, on the other hand, shot to $6 billion US. Foreign direct investment was recorded at $945 million US. All those, he says, are depicting a rising economy. In your view, what do you say?
Well, I think you answered most of the questions from the very beginning when you said these things are not being felt. So my question is, do you believe in statistics and numbers, or do you believe what your stomach is telling you?
I'm told numbers don't lie.
Your stomach doesn't lie either. And if you're hungry, you're hungry. You
Absolutely.
see? And that is always the best equalizer of the truth. When you make this budget presentation, it's in nice, written, flowing, beautiful English. The formatting is beautiful. So when you put it online, the cover looks beautiful. Everything looks official. And of course, we all know much of it are lies. Because if the number is saying one thing and your stomach is telling you you're hungry, which one are you going to believe? Your stomach or the beautifully formatted propaganda? That is what a budget is. It's a propaganda. You get to write what you want. But the people can answer back by telling you that what you're saying cannot be true. Otherwise, my condition will not be the way it is. And that's a good thing with life. Anybody can say whatever they want to say. And then we deal with the facts on the ground. And the facts of the ground, you already indicated it from the very beginning. The numbers are not translated on the ground. So you can say 5% growth, 6% growth is completely meaningless if it's not affecting people on the ground. Uganda is a typical small neo-colonial African state struggling to survive in the global system. Some African countries do it better. Ghana, Kenya, even Tanzania, Botswana, even Rwanda, under the dictatorship of Kagame, is doing better than Uganda under the dictatorship of General Yoweri Museveni. As a journalist, what is most interesting to me is not so much what is said in the budget, because as I said, when you control the narrative, you get to write what you want. If you, our host, write a book, you're going to put the things you want in that book, correct? That's what you do. So this is the budget, and the dictator gets to tell the narrative. And we come back and challenge the narrative, especially as a journalist. So to me, the biggest thing was what was not said in the budget. And that was the issue of corruption. Corruption, to me, is the existential threat in Uganda today. And if the dictator was an honest person, he would devote the bulk of his presentation dealing with the issue of corruption. But it's not, because he's also involved in corruption, so that's not surprising. So let me tell you what the corruption section says. This is all it says. It's not long. As regards fighting corruption and improving accountability of institutions, priority will be given to 1, ensuring transparency, accountability, and anti-corruption measures across government systems by implementation of electronic government, in especially procurement, health, education, and taxation, fast tracking and monitoring the effective implementation of government programs, strengthening the courts and case management systems through adequate staffing and digitization, and implementation of other covert and overt efforts in the fight against corruption. You see, the language sounds so beautiful, but all of it is nonsense. If you're serious, if you and I were in fact President of Uganda, what is the most obvious thing you would do to show you're serious? You would fire every one of those ministers involved in stealing mabati from starving people in Karamoja. Then people in Uganda would say, oh, this man is serious. That's what you would do. You don't give us this flowing poetry in the budget, which is complete propaganda. So that's action number 1. Number 2, look at what he says himself. Because you can't avoid it. I mean, even if you're controlling the narrative, you have to write something about it. So the parish model of growth, which is supposed to transform the economy by moving people from subsistence production to commercialize prosperity, economic, agricultural production. But look what he says about the system, his own system in the State of the Union. When I visited some parts of the country, I was told that some of the parish development model money has been given to people who are not eligible. This includes politicians and public servants. And then he also states, the State House Anti-Corruption Unit has arrested a number of culprits in the Acholi zone, where I started my upcountry inspection trips. And I'm going to other zones. So thieves, be on the alert. It almost sounds like a comedy thing. Are you telling me that the dictator who micromanages everything is learning for the first time that money is being stolen in the parish program by visiting upcountry? He's learning about this corruption for the first time? This is not credible in a country where he micromanages every issue. So now he makes it, and he's very good in propaganda. I give him that. Probably compared to any other African ruler, he's number 1 when it comes to propaganda and managing information. So now when people read this, they say, oh, so he's going to do something. He's serious. He just discovered for the first time that the parish money is being stolen. Ugandans are not that stupid. Ugandans are not that stupid. Uganda knows that he knows that the money is being stolen. He knew it in advance. In fact, remember what he said about corruption? He said, why are we so tough on these corrupt officials? After all, they're investing the money they steal in Uganda. So we should be happy. So you have the national leader condoning corruption and that expressing surprise at corruption at the same time. That's complete nonsense. So that to me was the most interesting thing in the budget. What was not said? The issue of corruption, which is the most dangerous pandemic facing Uganda today. Everything else in the budget is aspirational. We plan to do this. We shall do this. We will succeed if we do this. A lot of it has to be financed. And now that he's going head to head with the West, he's not going to get a lot of that financing, meaning all of those projects will remain aspirational. Thank you.
Thank you, Milton. Miriam, and he did speak about a lot of things as well. But if you remember, I think we had a conversation not so long ago about the deaths that were happening in the country, the shootings, the unrest, the sort of scare of people dying, being killed. And he mentioned that he's looking and he's working with people on, especially the recent spate of murders in the country. He said, he assured us that the incidents are isolated and that save for the rest of East DRC, where militants are active, the country is otherwise peaceful. That is among many other things he talked about. The GDP is at 13%, and government is ensuring it will increase to at least 19% in the next 5 years. He's talking about, he's looking forward to the next financial year and said we are looking at increasing ICT. There's a whole lot. But if we look at all these assurances, if we look at all these numbers, like Milton has highlighted, Miriam, where is the problem? Because it seems we are being, told every other time things look good indeed. And from his point of view and from the government's point of view, but it is a different story on ground.
Yeah, the condition of the ordinary Ugandan is getting worse due to the high cost of living. Today, for us living in diaspora, you see, like, if you used to send, let's say, $50 a week, and someone says, hey, this one can't even last a day or two, then you know that things are really tough. And we are also facing it tough because we have so many, our dependents are getting financially stressed, so we equally, face it. We also face it as we are the way we relate to them. So what was Museveni saying about the economic development? I think for so many years, the Ugandan economic growth is outstripped by the population growth, and the figures really don't balance. The population is outgrowing the economy. The debt is outgrowing the investments. So the reality is a deficit. We have a deficit economy. It cannot sustain its people. It cannot sustain its development. That's why we are overborrowing. And then we have a hole in our basket, which is corruption. With corruption, whether you are rich, you could be the richest country in the world. Rich countries, they are rich countries like the Arab oil or rich countries. But if you have corruption, you can't do anything. You can't get the government institutions going. You can't get the services trickling down to the people because the money is getting diverted. So the speech is the usual. I didn't even hear anything different. I mean, if you go to the last year's speech and you really scrap out a few issues like dates and whatever, you could as well think it's this year's speech and the several years back as well. That shows how stale the NRM government has become. There is nothing new. The parish model is the same as the Ntandikwa, is the same as the open wealth creation, is the economic wealth creation. It's the same as every other small, patch-up project that the NRM has ever come with. And the remarkable thing that the president said is saying that the economy, as long as it's still more than 70% is agro-based and not only, like commercial agriculture, but subsistence agriculture. Most of Ugandans are still dependent on subsistence agriculture, which does nothing much to improve on our economic development. He talked about the ICT, but he didn't mention that there is low supply of electricity. And if the supply of electricity, even if it was high, it's still expensive. You can't have ICT without electricity. You can't have ICT without infrastructure in schools. Where will the kids access the computers? Do you have the labs? Do you have the internet? So the structures, the economic structure really doesn't tally with his aspirations. And I was listening to the analysis of, I think during Changwanzi was talking about the national planning. I think the national plan, like they want to go to phase 4 when they have implemented like 17% of phase 3 national planning policy. So we are trying like to recycle policies, and they are still not working. So whatever is not working has nothing to do with the policies, but with the system itself. I don't know what the Ambassador Maiga can say about NRM government as an institution. If NRM government was your company, what would you do to make it work, Ambassador Maiga? Because for me, I feel like the whole thing is not working whatsoever.
Interesting question to the ambassador. Maybe he might need to answer that. Ambassador, if you could quickly answer that.
A company, all of us have had an opportunity, of course, of running companies, but to compare, well, it's the same question that you can take to the electorate, that if the company called the administration of President Yoweri Museveni is not really doing the government of the country perfectly well, why do you return the same government every 5 years whenever we have elections? That is the same question, but put differently. And as far as I'm concerned, if the worst thing that happened to the government of Uganda, I mean to the country, to our country, Uganda, was the NRM government or the Yoweri Museveni administration, then voters should mobilize themselves, or actually leaders like Humiria should go back to the country and then mobilize people so that they can change government or change systems and so on and so forth. But every 5 years we go for elections, this government is returned through a popular vote. And I don't want to agree with Milton what he says, because he continuously refers to President Yoweri Museveni as a dictator. And as far as the political science...
Ambassador, I'm sorry to cut you short, but we need to pick Francis Kamhanda's mind before we can, come back to respond to these queries. Right. Now, Francis, please, we are looking at the economy. We are looking at the State of the Nation address that happened the other day, which was Wednesday. And we are saying that globally, the World Bank has expressed concern that global economic growth has slowed sharply, and the risk of financial stress in emerging markets and developing economies intensifying amid elevated global interest rates. That aside, Uganda is said to be on a recovery journey. It says recovery of Uganda's economic development shows that COVID-19 pandemic effects have subsided and that the population is now actively participating in economic activities which are generating revenue for residents and in turn is lowering levels of poverty.
Lynn, like as I have always said, it depends on where somebody is in as far as the NRM government is concerned, and then what statement politically makes sense to them. Like as I've always said, for me, I'm more inclined into microeconomics than macroeconomics, where they are just aggregating. Where, for example, you will just say that we are here as 5 people, let's say, and then each one is supposed to have maybe 1 million Ugandan shillings. And then, but you find an ambassador maybe who is privileged is having money for all the 4 of us. And technically, like for us, we have nothing. And then you keep saying that group has money or that group is doing well. And yet it is only one person who is doing well. And a typical example is go and look at a budget that was allocated, for example, if it is true, to the clothes for the president. And then tell me if it was given to a parish, how many people would get clothed smartly. Well, I don't refuse that is not the way how it should be budgeted, but it should be commensurate to how the economy is growing. But now, having said that, I also want to talk about how the NRM government has been robbing Ugandans. Like when it comes to development, equal distribution of resources, you have always said, as Miriam said, there was the notion of wealth creation. Bona bagagawale, entandikwa. All those were a huge sounding nothing. Now there is the parish development model. Now, if I may do work on that, at each parish they send their 100 millions. Let me use my parish where I come from. At a village level, we have 1,000 homes, but let me just reduce that the parish should be 1,000 homes. So meaning 1,000 homes, if they distribute equally the 100 million, my father will be given, because he's the head of the household, my father will be given 100,000 Ugandan shillings. Really speak the truth, you are on the ground. Tell me the business that my father can do that can be able to pay school fees for my young brother who is either in the lowest secondary school that you can think of. That is one. Number two, tell me that if my brother or my father falls sick, the 100,000, there is a business that will have multiplied for my father to be able to get proper medical attention. And if the problem was beyond. So you see, that's why I'm saying all this is just a huge sounding nothing, that the current government uses it as propaganda. Like as how Dr. Almad said, that they know how to package. You know, I have been reading the parish development model guide of, I think, 2021. When you look at it, you may say this is the PAL, but go and read and then look at its practicability. Now that brings me to a point of Mayenga saying the president has always been elected over and over. I'm surprised that at a level of an ambassador doesn't know the dirt that is involved during elections, bloodshed, and vote rigging at an industrial scale. Recently, we concluded the election in Serere. I don't know whether some of these is more of I don't know even how I can name it. Like a person like ambassador, they enjoy it or not. And then, having put that aside, the past term that was given to NRM, they were saying it is Chisanja Hakuna Mchezo. Now, what came out of it, we saw theft again at an industrial scale. So wasn't it Chisanja Mchezo? Now, you saw the president tracking that is moving because of anti-corruption, because they are going to fight corruption. Those people who are corrupt are finished. But what is being done now? Hasn't corruption even tripled? Like he was endorsing it and then given his statement. So all these, when you aggregate them together, and now the amount of division that has been created in the country, one, between the haves and the have-nots, and even including the people in government have come out to analyze, which I expect Ambassador Mayenga to also make that analysis. Number one, I will begin with Ngobi, who gave a good analysis that the rich cannot sleep because the poor are hungry. that it was a big statement for this government to learn something. Number two, recently the IGG put out a statement that went viral, and it was true. She said, corruption is not affecting them. The truth is, corruption is not affecting Mayega. I agree with Betty, because she said that if for them the roads are bad, they are driving V6 or V8, which doesn't fill potholes. And if it breaks anyways, she even doesn't know the cost of repairing. Then, if she falls sick, she doesn't even know whether Murago has medicine or not, whether the condition is bad or not. The same applies to the other time we had Variomunsi fall sick from wherever she had gone. You saw immediately, I don't know whether they sent a helicopter and so on. So is Variomunsi, that is already showing you, Lynn, that Variomunsi is more important than you. We rather lose an entire village and save one Mayega, which I'm not saying that that life is not important, we need it. But if there was at least to think that the other Ugandans, because we are all equal partners in this country, would at least extend up to around 5%, even if it was 10%, but we are at zero. So whether this economy, we talk about the GDP growing now to maybe projected at 400 whatever billions and so on, to me it will not make sense for sure if we don't use the bottom-up approach. That what would it be? And then when you even say that our people are going to use this money and develop at a parish development model, develop what? What is it that you have imparted in these people that you are sure that when they are developing, they will lead to this, and so on and so forth. This aspect of saying they are attracting investors, some of them who are frying peanuts, and you call them investors. Some of them who come and they get holidays, while others who are Ugandans who are investing in Uganda, we see how they are being politically harassed. I don't want to go into that discussion, but I can give you a list of so many Ugandans, the way how they are treated as investors and the way how the foreign ones are treated if they are called investors. And by the way, we are still demanding the Rubowa hospital. We have never had anything. So the architecture of corruption, who is the president, will always look for ways of going around and then massage and then tell us how the economy, where he found it in 1986. If now Ambassador Mayeg is saying that what affected our economy is the pandemic and the war in Russia. Now, the GDP that Mayega was talking about and the president, that in 1986 it was at 1.5 billion. How sure are we that the war you also sustained on Uganda for so many years in the bush did not affect? If the war in Ukraine can affect Uganda, the GDP of Uganda, what about the war that was in Uganda? Couldn't it have been one of the causes why the GDP was at 1.5? Thank you.
Interesting. Now, I want us to get back into, if you have any reactions to so far what has been said by the different panelists. I don't know. Ambassador Henry Mayega, you had started on some reactions, if you're okay. Milton, if you have any reactions, please.
To what has been said?
Yes.
Well, I just want to concur with Francis that what we have in Uganda is a government of the elite, by the elite, for the elite. And yeah, I think he was referring to the viral video by Madame Kanya. And it's absolutely true. If you don't feel the impact of the poverty, then, you're untouched and you don't care. But that reflects very badly, because what is the purpose of government then? I think you are a better person if you work for a private corporation and you steal from the private corporation. It's not a good thing, but it's better than working for the nation, the state, and stealing taxpayers' money. When the taxpayer wants you to address issues of poverty, issues of hunger, issues of disease, and we have hospitals that are closing because water bills are not being paid, and issues of ignorance. And that's where quality education comes into play. You may not agree with the socio-political system, but countries like Cuba and China were transformed by the education system that uplifted the people individually and then the country collectively. China, before the revolution, I believe literacy was about 17%, something like that. Now it's in the 90s plus. Cuba, the same thing. So you have, because it's very difficult to exploit, mislead, and lie to educated people. So I think what we have in Uganda is a system that actually promotes ignorance. Because if you have an educated mass of people, it's very hard really to deceive them and mislead them for 38 years. So we're in a catch-22. In order to uplift the country, we need to raise the education level to a very high level, right? At the same time, you have a family regime. That's what we have in Uganda, a family regime who will be threatened, right, by people that are highly educated generally and people that are also economically wealthy. So the family wants to control all the levers of the economy. The people who succeed economically are chosen and designated so that they're beholden to the family regime in Uganda. We had a cooperative system, which was a model for the world, which was uplifting the wealth of Ugandans generally. But if you have everybody relatively wealthy, then you can't manipulate them that much, you see, because they're not dependent on being kind to people at State House and their family connections so that they can get something personal for themselves and their family. So we're not buying a catch-22. We cannot uplift the people generally so long as we have a family regime in Uganda.
All right, thank you, Milton. Miriam, any reactions?
Yeah, first of all, let me remind Ambassador Maiga that Mr. Museveni is not voted by Ugandans back into power. So NRM regime doesn't have the legitimacy to say that they've been voted by Ugandans back into power, since we have never had free and fair elections for as long as I can remember. I think for the last so many years. So I don't know the difference between a regime which comes to power through the use of arms and the one which comes to power through rigged elections. They all force their way into power, and that's the status of NRM government for the last 20 years or so. So Ugandans are held hostage by the NRM regime and its leadership, and we have to find a way out if we are to solve that problem. I had thrown that question to you so that you reflect if the management of the economy, every day we pay taxes, but we don't see accountability. The CEO, who is the president, comes out and admits that the country is corrupt. I mean, if you have a CEO, you are a shareholder and you give them your money, and they come and say, we ate your money and we don't know what to do about it. Surely, what would you do to such a person, such a money to pay? And Milton said you filed for bankruptcy, but I think you would fire him first and then file for bankruptcy as well. But back to the the government back to the state of nation, there is something we really we didn't focus on, but which is going on and is still going on. We see security officers who represent the ordinary worker being desperate about the little payment, the living conditions. But these people, the dangerous part is that they are armed. They are the ones who are armed and they have a potential to cause violence. So the so-called state of security, which the president talks about, is really so fragile because anything can happen anytime. And we've seen regimes fall, like Somalia, like Libya. They don't fall because they've not had peace before. They fall because the leadership fails to maintain the peace. And the corruption, and now, like we say, the economic disparities. What will the desperate masses do in order to alleviate their plight of poverty? Are they going to attack the rich in their bulletproof limousines or whatever cars the ministers drive? Are they going to come and invade the government? I mean, we don't have granaries, but I think if we are like the traditional African traditional kind of structure, economic structure, and we had granaries, the poor would come from the up country and come and raid granaries in order to get food. And we have reached at that point where there is that fragility, there is that kind of suspense hanging on over our shoulders. What will the masses do if this state of conditions doesn't improve? And when you listen to President Museveni, I mean, he's still talking the same thing. Value addition, the same thing in 10-point programs which he talked about when he was coming from the so-called bush in 1986. Are the same stories we are still talking about. Improve the value addition on coffee. But what has he done in the last 40 years, so-called, in the last 40 years or so? What has he done to add value to our agricultural produce? What has he done to industrialize Uganda? What has he done to improve the economy? I mean, they talked about education, public service, the infrastructure. And it's not like today he's going to get the magic to do what he has failed to do all these years. We have entrusted him with our resources. He has borrowed as much as he can borrow. But where is the accountability? When a leader comes out and laments that he has failed because the government is corrupt, but this is your government. You are the one who composes the government. And now you are telling the people who have entrusted you to manage that government, come and help me, the government is corrupt. Does he want us to go in there and tell him, you need to fire ABCD and do this and that? So is he trying to appeal to us that he has failed completely and he's also stuck? He doesn't know what to do about it, which looks to be the case. And in such a situation, what can we do as Ugandans? And what are we supposed to do?
Wow. Right. Ambassador Henry Maiga, you had reactions?
Very many, but of course, in the interest of time, I will try to be as brief as possible. The privileges. The point number one which I want to make is that there will always be a government, whether you like it or not. Whether you like that very government which is in charge of the country or not, there will always be a government. That one is a given. It's for a fact. So in the current situation obtaining in Uganda, we have the UPDF administration. It is in charge of the country, and all its officers have those privileges. Francis, you should know that you're not going to be equal to the Prime Minister. You're not going to be equal to the Chief Justice. You're not going to be in terms of privileges. The privileges are going to be there, and that this doesn't only apply to Uganda. It applies to the rest of the countries that at least I've been to. Point number two, which I want to make, because Milton made reference to China, how it pulled itself out of poverty, and it has done a really commendable job in as far as pulling people out of poverty. I'm privileged to have served in that country for 5 years at Uganda's embassy, and I know the story of China very well. And I just want to make just one point about the PDM, which is being adopted in Uganda. It's a replica of things that have been happening in China. And every year, China pulls out of poverty over 65 million people in that country. And so the architect of the PDM, and maybe for the first time, panelists should know, and maybe our listeners, is that the architect is Ezra Suruma, Professor Ezra Suruma, who lived in the US for many years, I remember, and also has been exposed to quite a number of other countries, how they do things in order to make sure that they make wealth for their people. In China, what happened is that they went through two stages. It was not as simplistic as Milton you'd want us to believe. But they went through two stages. The first stage was the political integration, because that country had so many enemies, both regional and from very far. So it has to go through two stages. The first stage was conducted by Chairman Mao, who did the political integration, because quite a number of regions of that country had wanted to secede. And so forcibly, China was made one country by one man, Chairman Mao. Of course, they went through a lot of problems. In the 1970s, for instance, they didn't even have enough food. And so the political integration, to cut the long story short, was actually done by Chairman Mao. And then his successor, when he took over after the death of Chairman Mao, the successor carried out what is called the economic, miracle of China. It began to free the economic space so that people could be involved in private sector and so on and so forth. And so the Chinese began to make money that way. So two stages are extremely important. And for purposes of us appreciating what China has gone through, one has to understand those two stages which China went through, and the rest is history. Of course, there are quite a number of things that are obtaining currently in China, which are similar to what is being implemented in Uganda as far as the PDM is concerned. Now, of course, Milton is laughing, and he has been he actually continuously refers to President Yoweri Museveni as a dictator, and I don't want to agree. Because as a student of political science, a dictator does not have a parliament. A dictator, in other words, doesn't have the three arms of government. And those three arms of government, of course, have to work in consonance for purposes of making sure that the country remains stable and the country remains democratic. So the laws of the country, the laws of Uganda actually are made in a parliament. We are not ruled by decrees like during the 1970s when Idi Amin was in charge of the country. We are not ruled by decrees as we had the Okello junta when it was in charge of the country. We are ruled in terms of enacting laws by parliament. Parliament does the laws, and then, of course, the president assents to them, and then they become law. And that's totally different from what, Milton, you would want us to believe that Uganda is a dictatorship. I definitely disagree with you. Now, the other one, which I wanted to respond to, again raised by Milton, is that the president never really made reference to corruption in his State of the Nation address, which is also not true, because he was very categorical when it came to corruption. He said that they are going to emphasize electronic government. And once you do electronic government, that reduces corruption in the country. One of the ways that you can reduce corruption in the country. Of course, you referred to the Mabati that were in quotes, you can say stolen, because people took them in spite of the fact that actually those items belonged to the Karamajong. So it is a very interesting story, because at one point in time, as far as I remember, President Yoweri Museveni was making case for us to deny bail to people who commit capital offenses, of which corruption was one. And it was objected to by, again, the opposition in the country, of which I want to believe that Milton, you're part, and quite a number of other people. The president has been very categorical about the things, but you see, the nature of the law in the country is such that it is extremely difficult for us to fight corruption in the current circumstances. Yes, you made a reference to those who have been arraigned before court. Some of them have not been arraigned in the court, in as far as the Mabati issue is concerned, but I believe that probably in due course, that is going to be made good. But quite a number of people have actually appeared before court. And when it comes to the PDM, because you also made a reference to what the remarks the president made when he visited Acholi, and as far as the PDM is concerned, that he talked about corruption that has already bedeviled the PDM, and as far as I know, and as far as the anti-corruption unit that is based in State House is concerned, because recently they made a statement. They have arrested over 300, and numbers don't lie, they have arrested over 300 individuals who have been involved in taking, or should I say accessing the PDM funds illegally, especially politicians and technocrats in the local governments. So that is a step forward, and as far as I'm concerned, and as far as fighting corruption is concerned. And I think the president should be appraised in as far as that is concerned. The other one which I wanted to make a quick reference to is the election, because I think, Miria, you were saying that yes, we have elections in the country, but these elections are not 100% perfect. But I also want to take you to the US itself, where actually cases of rigging have been mentioned, and the most recent one I think was mentioned, was talked about by former President Trump, when he said that actually the last elections in the US were rigged. So it's extremely difficult for any country to boast of a completely perfect elections. You will find imperfections in all elections that are going to take place in all countries, and therefore it becomes extremely difficult for somebody to defend a situation where you say that this is an exclusive problem of only Uganda. Yes, we have cases where the elections have been having imperfections. That is for a fact. Nobody can deny it. But these are facts that apply to quite a number of other countries. And what makes me comfortable is the fact that even if people continue talking about those imperfections, and as far as elections are concerned, the opposition in Uganda continuously goes and vies for positions of responsibility in the country. That means they have the trust that at least the elections are going to bring forth those probably who would have won those elections. And they have not only done that by contesting elections and then winning them, the opposition doing so, they have also gone to courts of law and won court cases where they've been cheated. Yeah. So in as far as elections are concerned, yes, I know that we are not there. There are still imperfections in as far as elections are concerned in our country. After all, even the US, where many of you speak from, it has had its issues. The US has had a democracy for the last 250 years, but they cannot boast of having elections or electoral processes that are 100% perfect. And so it's a continuous process to make these elections as perfect as possible. And therefore, it would be a very good idea to see you, Milton, to see you, Miriam, and Francis coming back home in Uganda to take part in those elections. And then you see, the taste of the pudding is in the eating. The moment you don't take part in elections and you're just talking about the imperfections that we have in those elections from very far, in my view, you're not making a point. Go and take part in those elections, and therefore you'll be making a point. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ambassador. I see quite a number of comments in the chat room. Allow me to get through them before we can get into our other interesting conversation on the UPDF in Somalia. Milton Alimadi is saying, like we saw in Sri Lanka, the poverty became too much and the poor attacked the rich, including the president's home, but it must not be corrupt. That is not a given. What was the reaction to this? I don't remember. Well, Miriam says that's most likely our situation. Milton goes on to say that is why the French Revolution happened, privileges. The Museveni regime has been in place 38 years. China has transformed in 15. So Museveni is in which stage? Rubber parliament, rubber judiciary, electronic government will prevent Mabati. Electronic government will prevent General Museveni taking $1 million bribe from Patrick Ho. Oh, wow. All these interesting revelations. He can fire all the ministers immediately if he was serious. If they can arrest the people based on allegations, why not arrest the ministers based on allegations too for stealing Mabati? I want to assure you, Milton, that some of the ministers were actually arrested and their cases are ongoing. Biden did not shut down the internet and did not massacre Tory opposition supporters before the election, and he did not kill returning officers after the vote. And he tortured like complaints. Oh, right. Okay, those are some of the comments coming in. Now, I understand we still have quite a number of comments coming in. Please use the chat room if you can, especially on the State of the Nation address. Francis Kamhanda says, Ambassador, I don't agree with you. It does not need to be in Uganda to participate in elections. That is where your government is short-sighted. Okay, allow us to move a little bit to the UPDF situation in Somalia. If you remember earlier this week, actually around last week, yes, at least 54 soldiers were killed during a May 26th deadly attack on an African Union transition mission in Somalia in a base manned by Ugandan troops, and the president announced this. Very many of those were discovered, and I can assure you, well, not assure you, but from the news coming in, is these bodies have been returned to the country, and of course barriers will be, will kick start. And when he was speaking, he said that he is going to make sure that the people who were on watch, the commanders who were on watch during that attack, are questioned and investigated to figure out. The Sun's president, Muhoozi Kainerugaba, also took a trip to Somalia immediately to, of course, on ground to understand what was going on and how that is going. But if we look at these stories and the ones that have been coming, I put it to you, gentlemen and lady, it really is our station, is our UPDF station in Somalia worth it? Should we continue putting our soldiers out there to be maimed, to be killed by the Al-Shabaab? Milton, I start with you.
Okay. First of all, condolences to the families of all those who lost their young men in Somalia. They didn't deserve that. They don't deserve that. And the soldiers who were killed do not deserve that. Unfortunately, Somalia has basically known outfield since early 1990s when Siad Barre was overthrown. And as a Pan-African who cares about every African country and all African people, Somalia does need other African countries to come to its assistance. And it could be done and should be done the proper way. But what we have in Somalia today is a situation where General Museveni has deployed thousands of our soldiers. It's an open-ended deployment. I think Ugandan soldiers have been there almost 15 years now, with no end in sight or solution to this Somalia problem. Because even though it's gone through several iterations in terms of the names, but the common theme is that it's an African umbrella. It's not really an African umbrella. It's General Museveni making a deal with the United States and the West that in return for America not having to deploy troops on the ground so that American soldiers might be killed, Uganda is willing to do the dirty work for you. And in return, you leave me alone when it comes to issues of human rights abuse, when it comes to issues of corruption, when it comes to issues of stealing elections. And this is not something I'm just saying. Anybody can Google and do the research. In the past, when the dictator was challenged on issues of human rights abuse, and what did he say? We can withdraw our troops from Somalia. So he uses it like a bargaining chip, like to blackmail the United States, Oh, keep quiet. You want me out of Somalia? And American soldiers dying in foreign deployments can bring down governments in the United States. It can affect the outcome of elections. So obviously, if an African country is willing to send its soldiers to be killed in Somalia in return for some money and in return for my silence on human rights abuse in that country, corruption, and all that, stealing elections, that to the United States administration is an acceptable bargain, which is the problem for us as Ugandans, which is the problem for Somalia, you see? Because if we had an authentic African deployment, it would be well articulated and planned. There would be a timeline. They would say by such and such a day, we would have trained a capable Somali army. Because each country, after all, needs to take care of their own security and protect its sovereignty. Otherwise, you're not a sovereign country, right? So we don't have that. Because you have Uganda willing to send thousands of its troops to be in Somalia. Instead of saying, let's select 10 African countries, each one of them send 2,000 or 3,000, right? They send 3,000, you have 30,000 well-trained and deployed soldiers from different African countries with a definite agenda. And if that agenda does not work, you have to explore some other things to do. But you can't have an open-ended deployment. We don't know when the deadline is. We don't know when they're supposed to come back. And the dictator has no incentive to bring them back home because he has a good bargain with the United States. Keep quiet, and I will do this for you. But if you had 10 African countries, all of them sending soldiers, they would not be able to have that kind of bargain with the United States. They would say, we are here for 6 years. We're going to train Somali soldiers within 6 years to take care of their security. If there are periodic problems, we can send in a small intervention force to help stabilize things, and we get out quickly. But the bulk of the security of Somalia needs to be maintained by the people of Somalia. The second point, and I'll make this very quick in the interest of time. First of all, I don't believe in the number of casualties that was announced by the dictator. And I have a problem because the number is too similar with a past number. You know, numbers stay in my head. So when I had 54, I said, wait a minute, this number is too familiar. I went back and remember the massacre of November 2020, when supporters of the opposition party were massacred before the election. And then the reports came out saying perhaps as many as 200 people were killed. Remember what the dictator said? 54. Now we have Shabab saying, oh, they killed more than 100, and they had videos of some of them being taken as prisoners, as captives. And the dictator comes out with 54 again. So I'm very suspicious. I'm saying we need for parliament, at least the opposition, to call for investigation of this incident in Somalia, and we get to the bottom. The relatives of people who have soldiers in Somalia, their parents, if they've not heard from them, if they were speaking with them on their cell phone and they've not heard for a long time, there are ways of finding out the true figures, number one. But that's not as important of having an investigation in parliament, asking the question, how long are we going to be there? How many of them are there? When are they coming home? Those are much more important than finding out the figures. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Milton, for that. You know, it's very interesting where we are with Somalia. In fact, 16 years in, and whereas the world seems to say there's been great improvement there in Somalia, Uganda is still keeping the soldiers there. And day in, day out, we are getting reports that there's been attack here, an attack there, and we don't seem to learn from this. Now, we are getting many people, you know, the public, we are seeing the opposition has come forward and they're saying they're raising questions on this continued attacks on our UPDF soldiers, but also on the sustenance. For how long are we going to sustain that mission in Uganda as we keep, rather in Somalia, as we keep losing soldiers? This is to you, Francis Kamhanda, because from the opposition angle, we seem to be losing more soldiers, yet we do not want to move out. And this, according to reports, is one of the most deadly attacks on the UPDF since 2007.
Thank you, Lynn, and other panelists. What I would have to say first is I have no doubt UPDF can win a battle, but UPDF cannot win a war where things have reached. Number one, because of corruption. Now, when it goes back to the numbers, let me just use the numbers that they have declared that the UPDF accepts, 54 bodies. But there is one lady and two gentlemen who were captured, and I don't think that they are still alive. If this government was transparent, would have come and said, we have brought 54 bodies and 3 are feared dead because they don't know their whereabouts. I can be challenged on this. Then the next one, why I'm saying that Uganda, we went, yes, it is good to go and ensure that because of Pan-Africanism, you have to go and help and then pacify. But then we have decided to become an occupation force. And that's why now we are getting all these problems. Ambassador is here. I know he may not be a security expert, but he should tell us what is the exit strategy of the UPDF, or when they were going to Somalia, what was the agreement? Are you going to stay there for forever? Are you going to stay there for 5 years, and so on? Then number two, where I am cognizant of the fact that as a Pan-Africanist that we are pacifying Africa for all of us, but what is the benefit of the country in as far as the Somalia war is concerned? Because I don't want us to be like a situation where we went to South Sudan, sacrificed a lot, used our resources, but now when it came to strategic businesses or that would accrue to benefit the Ugandan, then you find like Kenya has banks there, businesses that really make sense, as opposed to where Ugandans are selling sweets on the streets in Sudan. So that should come out and should be very clear for the government to tell us. And then I will go back to the ideal of corruption. In a situation where I'm not a soldier, just I'm a lay person, where you know there is a problem, or where you know the Al-Shabaab are a terror, how do you like deploy your soldiers in small numbers? Mayaga, for your own information, Ambassador, make research. Even where they were supposed to deploy, let's say 400 soldiers, they would only deploy 200 because of corruption. Those who were supposed to be taken, they would not take them because of that. And even those who come back, for your own information, sometimes their money, they don't get it in full. And all these issues in the security circles are depicted by even when you see policemen, soldiers, even others killing themselves, those who are at home. So the problem is much bigger. But then to sum it all, how did Somalia as a country come to this point? Exactly what the NRM government is doing. Said Barre had ruled Somalia for about 38 years. At the initial stage, the country was together, but then the country went on being divided. And then we see at the end of his regime, the country degenerate into this turmoil. It should be a lesson for Uganda to learn from, that are we also not heading such eventualities as we continue being in Somalia? are we not jeopardizing the security back home? So as a country, I conclude by saying that we should have an exit strategy. It's what I need generally the ambassador to explain to us what was their exit strategy, so that our brothers, our sisters do not continue having death that is unexplained. Like, this is not thoroughly explained. They can come back and then guard our borders and so on against all this harm. For we have, as a country, I believe we have done our part in as far as helping Somalia is concerned and pacifying it. It would be a high time we come back home. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis, for that. If I could quote some of the words that the first son, and that is General Muhoozi, mentioned. He said he cautioned troops not to relax because of the Africa, it is called the African Union Transition Mission drawdown, but instead be more aggressive. He said the former UPDF commander, Land Forces, noted that withdrawal operations, if not well planned, could cause a lot of damage than any other phase of the operation. And Miriam, I come to you. I mean, that now revealing that gross tactical deployment and intelligence lapses led to a high death toll. With all that going on, we know that for a long time, the opposition has been calling for the withdrawal of UPDF. And the UPDF seemingly is not ready to withdraw. But for how long is a country going to continue losing its soldiers? Somebody was comparing us to the US during the Afghan war. And so have we reached that level? Can we not listen anymore as a country?
Lynn, the issue of Somalia, first of all, I also want to convey my condolences to the bereaved. And like Milton said, we will never know the number of Ugandans we lost in Somalia since, like they said, truth is the first victim of such incidences, and the numbers in most cases are cooked up. Al-Shabaab is talking about hundreds, UPDF is talking 50, quoting the number that has become a cliche. So, but we can't forget that these are children of Ugandan mothers and fathers, and they have brothers and sisters who have lost their loved ones and could be going through pain. Question is, on the side of Uganda, how many of Ugandans do we lose in such a campaigns? The other day, there was an attack on UPDF in DRC. Today, we get to hear about Somalia because the AMISOM is a joint operation, and there are so many agencies involved apart from Uganda. But if it was a Ugandan campaign, you will never hear about even the numbers. You will never even hear that there was such a massive loss of lives. We've been losing people in DRC war, and you've never heard about anybody saying that we have lost so much. Like Milton said, if you get to lose like US citizens in foreign combats, I mean, that would even be the cause of losing power, the government being removed from power for negligence, for subjecting the lives of citizens into danger. But it's like Uganda is a no man's business. When Ugandans die in foreign combats, it's like business as usual. When will we start to care about our fellow Ugandans? It's like the UPDF is like a personal army of Museveni and family. I mean, you see his son, it's either Museveni or his son or whatever. I mean, he's a general, but we don't forget that he's not the army commander. So they engage in sometimes shady operations. If you have a relative in the UPDF, you might have, you could be private such. You would hear sometimes they're like in some Western African country somewhere, They are guarding some dictator who's being threatened. Other days you would hear like they're in Sudan. And some of these deployments are not approved by the parliament, as the case should be. And in this case, in Somalia, the president himself came out and admitted that corruption in UPDF, again, we see corruption everywhere. It's corruption, of course, everywhere. But we've reached at such a level that even the president cannot hide it. And he has to say, Ugandans lost lives because of corruption. How are we going to see accountability? Who's going to account for such a people who have lost lives? I mean, 100 people, 100 citizens dying, whether they are UPDF or not, these are Ugandans. These are innocent Ugandans losing their lives. And then you hear the president, who is also the commander-in-chief, coming out to say that, oh, your children died because some of the officers here are very corrupt. They are corrupt. They send in untrained officers simply because they want the money. Now the operation in Somalia is a money making venture for UPDF. UPDF on the part of the institution, because when they engage in the operation, they get like incentives, like the training from US government, the guns, which they later used to kill Ugandans on Kampala streets. So it's an incentive on the side of the institution, on the side of Museveni. He uses it as a bargaining chip. You know, when you threaten him, I pull out my my army and all that. So it's also an incentive on the side of other officers, as it brings in money. When the UPDF officers are deployed in Somalia, they earn more money compared to the peanuts they earn when they are serving in Uganda. So they go into such operations under the much needed money. I've had an incident where an elderly man, almost into 50, who has retired, he has been in UPDF, he's a veteran and had retired, but due to poverty, because the retirement package they give you cannot last long due to the economic hardships on ground. So due to poverty, this guy had to run back to Somalia. He left his family. He's like in 50s and he has long left the active military service. So his capacity to even escape such an attack is really minimal. And those people are pushed back into the desire to go back and fight, simply because he might get a chance and a few dollars, which would become like his retirement package or whatever. And the corruption in the system allows such a people to be recruited. Maybe the officers connive to have a cut on how much he's gonna get and all that. So you can imagine if you meet such a person and he was the one guarding on the watch of when the Ugandans were attacked. And I think that's the type of corruption that Museveni is talking about. If Museveni is a thorough commander-in-chief, you would have noticed such lapses in UPDF a long time ago. There was a time when some officers were arrested and charged in court-martial due to corruption because they were selling the supplies, they were stealing fuel and all that. And there were so many attacks on Ugandans before due to corruption. The same corruption is following them, and it's leading to loss of lives. The key issue being loss of innocent lives of Ugandans. Whether they are in uniform or not, they are Ugandans. And who is accountable to that? Who is going to account for that? Should we even call them like murder cases? Because if you are negligent on duty, imagine you are like a head of a hospital and your negligence on duty led to death of so many patients. Or if you are headmaster of a school and your negligence led to the loss of lives of so many students, and you held accountable. Why don't we see UPDF officers, those in charge, being held accountable for the lives of Ugandans who are lost, who lose lives in combat due to such a carelessness? I know when you are in combat, people die because it's a war, yes. But there are cases of corruption, like the president is saying. So there must be really gross corruption by the time the president admits that there was corruption. So who is being held accountable? And if Museveni was really being genuine, he should also resign as a commander-in-chief because he's the head of a corrupt institution. When does he take responsibility really? And when does he supervise any institution? There is corruption in government. He also admits it, where he's the head. He's the head of the government, he's the head of the cabinet. And there is corruption there. There is corruption in every institution now, including the UPDF. I'm really not to wish harm to him. But I wonder if there is such a gross corruption in UPDF, how long will it take him such a corruption to creep in and even endanger his own security? So you wonder about the security of Uganda. Are we going to see if Al-Shabaab can attack UPDF in Somalia? Will they be able to attack us in Kampala like we've seen in previous years? You against such a negligence that is happening due to corruption. So those are the issues that we should worry about as Ugandans. But as for the case of AMISOM and being deployed in Somalia, really, I think it's time the AMISOM should leave. And it's time for Somalis to take care of their business. The AMISOM should have been there to pacify the place, and that has been achieved. They've been there to help recruit the Somalis so that they have the capacity to manage their system. And if you look at the Al-Shabaab are children of Somalis. So it's their country, it's their terrain, it's their politics, it's their culture, it's their children. So I think they have an advantage on controlling their politics and their kids and their affairs more than the foreign troops coming in and trying to manage the peace situation on their behalf. And if we would use the case of terrorism in Somalia, if you compare it with CON, it had to take a lot of approaches towards that, including the cultural leaders stepping in and talking peace, including reconciliation efforts, the amnesties and all that, and the church leaders. It took all the fronts, everybody, all the efforts, but locally. So the Somali leadership, I think, has reached at that point where they can locally mobilize the forces, their leadership, their politicians, their religious leaders, cultural leaders, and everybody to intervene and mitigate in peaceful processes, whether it includes disarming the Al-Shabaab and mobilizing them back into society, or looking into the issues why they are fighting. There has to be a real fundamental issue why there is continuous war in Somalia, or why their children are joining arms vis-a-vis maintaining peace. I don't think that citizens of a certain country would just wake up one day and say, we're going to fight, destroy our country every day, every other day, without a cause. So let that cause be attended to.
Absolutely, absolutely agree with you. Thank you so much. Ambassador Henry Maega, quite a number of issues that have come up. In case you might have answers to them. We know you're not a security expert, but you might have an insight into these things. So we are seeing that questions of continued presence, of course, of the UPDF in Somalia and its sustainability coming forward. But we're also looking at a continued request for a concrete plan for Uganda's exit strategy from the Somalia. And that is where we are at the moment. Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Of course, it is sad that we had to lose 54, which to Milton sounds like a fictitious number. And also Francis, because they are questioning the number. It is sad that we lost those Ugandans, and everybody should feel bad about it, because the aspiration of all of us is to make sure that every Uganda, wherever they are, where Miriam is, where Milton is, where Francis is, they are as safe as it can be possible. That is the biggest responsibility of any head of state. I was following the story of after the Twin Tower bombings in the US, I listened to the speech which was made by George Bush Jr., and he said that his biggest, no, senior, sorry. that his biggest responsibility was actually to make sure that the lives of Americans are as protected as possible. So the sole responsibility of any government and any government is to make sure that Ugandans, wherever they are as safe as possible. So we need to, at the moment, I think, focus on the rationale as to why the UPDF is in Somalia. It is in Somalia under the auspices of the AU and the UN. And I don't want to agree to what suggestions of Milton that these are agreements between the US and Uganda. That is not there. If he has a document that testifies to that, yes, he can table it and we can make good reference to that kind of document. But as far as I know, and as far as the facts stand as of now, the UPDF is in Somalia under the auspices of the UN and the AU and the mission, under the mission called Amazon. It's very clear, just as clear as that. The Americans were there, of course, before, and you remember the story of 18 of their Marines who were paraded on the streets after they had been killed. And that was after Siad Barre had been removed from power in Somalia. So the mission of the UPDF in Somalia is bona fide. It was cleared by the African Union. It was cleared by the UN. We are not in that country illegally. And we're not the only ones who are in that country. We have Burundian forces in their thousands there. We have Kenyan forces in their thousands there. The Ethiopian, I mean, the Kenyans are quite a number in that country and so on. So it is something that involves quite a number of African armies in order to pacify that country. And you remember even the shipping lanes had become extremely insecure through the Red Sea to the Suez Canal. And we should be commending the UPDF and the rest of the armies that are taking part in the Amazon. Now, of course, as I've said, it was unfortunate that we lost these people. And I want to believe that the government has given the action numbers. If there are any more UPDF officers or rank and file members who got killed in the process of the confusion which was there just a couple of weeks ago, I'm sure the government of Uganda is respected and it will definitely give us those numbers. So that is the beginning point of these arguments. The UPDF are in Somalia under the auspices of the AU and the UN. And that means they are there lawfully, they are there legally, and also in the spirit of Pan-Africanism. We are not in Somalia as UPDF or as a country, simply to go and make probably fortunes. We are there under the auspices of the African Union and therefore under the umbrella of Pan-Africanism. That is extremely important for us to note. Now, of course, I've mentioned the other fact that as far as I'm concerned, I'm not aware. And if Milton can table an agreement that was made between the Americans and Uganda in order for our country to get involved in what is happening in Somalia, yes, that document can be tabled. And then we can probably have a discussion about that one. And so the UPDF is actually not in Somalia for a Tea Party. And therefore, at any one point in time, and of course, it is also unfortunate that we, in the process of pacifying that country, we might be caught in the melee and therefore lose personnel, which is very, very regrettable. As far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, the UPDF is not about to withdraw from Somalia because that would be a recipe for more confusion. It would be a recipe for the spread of terrorism, the way it had begun to spread into Kenya and also in Uganda. And, you know, really, this is what brings me to the argument about commenting about security issues as to whether we, you see, for you to be in a position to make good comments about security, you also need to have good security credentials so that you understand. In other words, when, for instance, we have problems of insurgencies that are in the DRC and they cross the border and begin to cause insecurity in Uganda, any Senate government, as far as I know, will definitely take it as a responsibility to make sure you actually go to the epicenter where the confusion is coming from so that you can nip that problem in the bud. And therefore, that is what took us to Somalia. And that's what took us to the DRC. That's what took us to Southern Sudan. Southern Sudan is very, very crucial to us because I think it must have been Francis who was talking about it, because on an annual basis, the trade volume between Uganda and Southern Sudan is in the region of about 1.5 billion US dollars. And therefore, that is something that is, as far as I'm concerned, that is something that is very important for our country. Because the moment you promote regional integration, in the process, you're also promoting economic integration of the region. And therefore, an expanded market for Ugandan markets, I mean Ugandan products. And Uganda, as far as I'm concerned, is a country that can easily become a food basket in the region. Because as we speak right now, we supply food to Western Kenya, we supply food to Southern Sudan, we supply food to parts of the DRC, where there has not been any effective government since the colonial times. We supply food to parts of northern Tanzania. We supply food products to Rwanda and sometimes even to Burundi. And in the spirit of that African Pan-Africanism and in the spirit of regional integration, it is extremely important for us to be concerned about what is happening in the region. I may probably at this time mention it to panelists and also our listeners that there is that plan that actually Ethiopia and Somalia are going to be part of the East African community. And therefore, that is going to bring us a market of 139 million people, which is good for our country. And therefore, when we get involved in Somalia, yes, we can think about the exit strategy. But when should it happen? Should it happen when there is still more confusion in Somalia, or should we wait for that time when actually Somalia becomes much and much or more and more stable? And then we can say, okay, this is the time for us to withdraw. Of course, it is extremely important for us to talk about the exit strategy, because whoever gets involved in those kinds of ventures must also think about, when should I withdraw from that kind of situation? And as far as I'm concerned, our continued stay in Somalia is extremely important. And as far as regional integration is concerned, and as far as Pan-Africanism is concerned, and we are making an addition and we're making a contribution to the pacification of the Horn of Africa by our stay there. Rwanda at the moment, of course, for purposes of probably people understanding what's happening in the region, Rwanda is now taking part in pacifying parts of Mozambique that actually had really got involved in a lot of insecurity as a result of some who had taken religious bigotry into thinking that that can actually change the situation in Mozambique and so on and so forth. And there was that insecurity, you remember, that was in Mozambique, and therefore Rwanda and other African countries that take part. And of course, Uganda is not part of what's happening in Mozambique, but we must actively be interested in what is happening in the region, because that is one of the ways how we can make a good contribution to regional integration. That's one of the ways how we can make a good contribution to Pan-Africanism. And that's one of the ways how we can actually boost our own economy, because an expanded market for our country means quite a lot in as far as economic integration and economic growth of our own country is concerned. Those are extremely important arguments in as far as I'm concerned, because once we do that, then we are sure that we are making a good contribution. Now, somebody I think referred to the pre-elections. That must have been, I think, Milton, pre-election killings in Kampala. And we have talked about this subject, because I don't want to waste a lot of time on it, because we have talked about this before, and I'm surprised it keeps coming up, why these killings were concerned. As somebody was, I'm not saying that I'm a security person, but I think I have adequate security credentials to understand what the situation was in 2020 when these things happened. You cannot let one political party, and in this case it was NUP, to go on the streets, erect illegal roadblocks, beat up supporters of the NRM, and do all sorts of things, extort money and so on and so forth. And you think that the security personnel are just going to look at you. Definitely they must rise to the occasion and make sure that they stop what you're doing. And that's how we came to this, because the kind of mayhem that NUP was creating in the city definitely had to stop. If it had been left to continue, that would have been a totally different story. And therefore, probably the condemnation of the Yoweri Museveni administration would have come from a totally different angle and in a totally different fashion. But those who got involved in that mayhem and they were causing all sorts of problems definitely had to be stopped. And that's why we got into that situation of the mayhem that happened in 2020. It didn't just come out of the blue, but the government and any responsible government definitely has got to stop. Take the case, of course, the example of what happened at outside the White House when the elections had just concluded in the US and Biden had won elections, and then people went to the White House and also parts of the where their Congress sits in the precincts of that area, and they began to demonstrate and also to beat up people and all these kinds of things. Assuming that the security forces in the US had just looked on, what would have happened? Definitely, any serious country has to take a responsibility to make sure that peace is restored, and all those who resist what the security forces are doing definitely are going to be subdued. So it is in that spirit, if I go back to the argument, which is on the floor right now, the UPDF definitely had to get involved in Somalia to make sure that that country, in the spirit of Pan-Africanism and in the spirit of regional integration, is pacified so that we can move on as one single region, and therefore, so that in a sense we don't also allow terrorism to, Somalia to become a springboard for terrorism in the region. We had to stop that kind of thing, and for me, I'm happy that Ugandan army, the UPDF, and the army in Kenya and Ethiopia and Burundi had to get involved in Somalia in order to pacify that country. As to whether the country has been pacified, yes, I want to believe that for a very large measure, the pacification of Somalia has happened because it is not as bad as it was. Even if we are having pockets of resistance by the Al-Shabaab against the AU forces that are active on the ground. It's extremely important for us to make sense of that. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Ambassador Maiga. Gentlemen and lady, if you have any reaction, you could use them now, share them now rather, as we wind up on this conversation. Any reaction?
I have a very quick reaction. Yeah. When the Europeans used their armed forces to expand commerce and business, that was called imperialism. And it was condemned and it was bloody. So if it was bad for Europeans doing it against Africans and other parts of the world where they went and plundered, it's also bad for Uganda to be using its military to do the same thing. Because that, if you listen carefully, that's what the ambassador is saying. You want to create bigger markets, integration. So that is part of the military presence in these countries. Forget issues of sovereignty. Forget the similarity between what the Ugandan military is doing and what European militaries did historically to plunder, to subjugate, and to expand their market and commerce. That is very dangerous for a Pan-African to be speaking in that way. The election massacres that will happen, yes, some thugs attacked went to the Capitol in the United States, inspired by somebody who claimed he had been robbed of the election. They were not massacred. No, 200 people were not killed in election-related issues in the United States. So to try to draw a comparison between that and what happened in Uganda is very unfortunate. It almost makes it appear as if the ambassador does not care about his fellow Ugandans who were killed. But I would like to believe that he's only saying that in his official capacity as an ambassador. And if he were not in official capacity as an ambassador, he would be a little more sympathetic to the fate of those people who were killed. So that would be my response. Thank you very much.
Right. Any other response?
Just a quick one, Lynn.
Okay, let's hear from Francis first, Ambassador. Just a moment.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted to add on to say that Ambassador was saying that most of Somalia has been pacified. This is artificial pacification. And believe me, Ambassador, because the same way how things are done in Uganda, like lack of structure and so on, is what again you are replicating in Somalia. So if your mission is to ensure that there is pacification, you have to build structures. But anyway, if structures are failing in Uganda, how can you build structures in Somalia? And believe me, Ambassador, for all the 17 years we have been in Somalia, if we withdraw now, give it 1 week, the Al-Shabaab will capture Somalia. But then the issue is it worth it? What have you been doing? If a withdrawal, like in 1 week, again, the whole government will collapse. Then does it mean then that we should keep there forever? Because your withdrawal would mean the government would collapse. So there is something, like as how Mariam had said, that is fundamental that you are failing to address. You are just talking of Pan-Africanism, regional integration, and so on. But regional integration comes with solid structures, comes with mindset. Like, what other components are you doing or have you been doing for the last 17 years that would make Somalia stand on its own? I'm telling you, Ambassador, sometimes some of these things, it is easy. Like, yes, like how we would say the president is helping and so on. But as Miriam said, it is at the expense of innocent lives, of people's lives. Like, I don't think that any of Museveni's relatives was among the 54 people, or even the past who have died before in Somalia and so on. So some of us who directly have our family members who are being massacred there, we don't take it easy. We say, yes, there was a certain cause, but is the mission achieved? Like, as I told you, that I agree UPDF can win a battle, but they cannot win a war. What is in Somalia is a war that is beyond. I think what we need to educate ourselves is what brought to Somalia to where they are. And then we go back to the drawing board. But otherwise, I would also say, can you allow the Al-Shabaab to capture power and then we contain them? What is the discipline? How are people supposed to be? But saying that we are fighting them from there, I'm telling you, we shall never ever win them.
Right. Thank you, Francis. Ambassador, and then Miriam.
Just a quick one, because Milton almost imputed that I was half-hearted in as far as the 54 UPDF officers were killed. I just want to say that it would also sound, when you question the number of 54, you would sound like you want to hear more numbers dead. Can I ask you that?
No,
Definitely
I want to
not.
hear honesty from a president.
Definitely not. And I don't agree with you at all. Because you would want to give an impression that Henry Maiga doesn't care about the UPDF officers who were killed in Somalia, which is not true. I'm just as concerned as anybody that, look, these are Ugandans who are getting killed in the line of duty, in the spirit of Pan-Africanism, in the spirit of integrating the East African region. And sometimes you have to integrate these countries in order to stop mayhem. And if you don't do so, it becomes extremely difficult. So these are steps which were taken with somebody who has enough security credentials. It's one thing for us to be talking on these talk shows and showing all sorts of concern and so on and so forth. It's another one actually to have the concern. And I'm just as concerned as any other Ugandan. So it is not true that I don't care about the 54 who are killed. If you want more numbers, since you doubt the 54, actually it is you who wants to hear maybe 100 killed or something like that. The second one is the comparison which was made between Somalia and Uganda, and it would sound as if that during the time of Siad Barre and thereafter, Somalia had actually democracy for that matter. It didn't have democracy at all. In Uganda, every 5 years, it is sure that we are going to have elections. Those who want to vie for positions of responsibility, yes, they can have them. They can participate. Milton, you can come. Maria, you can come. Anybody can contest in those elections, which is extremely important for us in as far as the promotion of democracy is concerned. So we are, in other words, trying to compare apples and tomatoes if we are going to compare what used to happen during Siad Barre's time and what's happening in Uganda at the moment, because we're having regional elections every 5 years, despite all the imperfections that we can speak of. The situation in Somalia then and the situation in Uganda now are two different things. Thank you.
Right. And finally, Miriam, as we conclude, your concluding remarks and also maybe some of your reactions.
I think I will reiterate what I said earlier. It's a pity that Uganda today, the only thing we have to export is militarism, soldiers. I mean, we export in Iraq, we export everywhere. Don't be surprised if tomorrow we are sending mercenaries to Ukraine or whichever name you call them on behalf of USA or some other NATO country for a few dollars. That's the only thing that today M7 can export. It's like the NRM regime, the only thing they have, should I call it achievement, maybe in quotes, is soldiers. Other countries like India can export IT professionals, China exports engineering and all that stuff. But the only thing Uganda has capacity to export are military soldiers. And we've been sending mercenaries across the globe, including in Iraq. Surprising. Oh, I even heard we have some in Afghanistan right now, but that's a topic for another day. But it's a pity. Why can't we retain these young people in the country and train them for other skills? Let them be health officials, let them be economic professionals, ICT, instead of just being soldiers and being exported into countries to die in combat. For the issue of Somalia, yeah, I have, like I've said, that the AMSOM, I think, should wind up. They should really transform into something else, like a training force, and leave like a skeleton officers just to transform into the Somalis should take care of their own security, and they should be empowered to even take care of their own politics. If Al-Shabaab has support, let it get into power. If the Somalis don't support Al-Shabaab, the Somali people have capacity to kick out Al-Shabaab, and we should trust them to do that. What the other agencies can do, they should guard their borders. Kenya should protect its borders. Ethiopia should protect its borders, and let's allow Somalia to grow on its own. I know that by the time the UPDF intervened, it was necessary, but I think they've reached a point where they can take care of their own business, and it's time for Ugandan children to come back home and engage in developing their country.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much, Miriam. Thank you, Milton. Thank you, Francis and Ambassador Henry Maeka, for yet another thrilling episode of Uganda Diaspora Show here on Civic Space TV. We'll catch you again next time, and we hope to keep tabs on what's happening in and around the country, and of course out where you people are based. I wish you a lovely weekend, and God bless.